one could be forgiven for viewing these private security firms as an extension of the state, which retains similar powers of surveillance and control. Indeed, this is reinforced by the fact that G4S was just recently contracted to carry out some of the investigatory duties of the Birmingham police force. Right? So the other major point to make about this, I think, is that the UKBA's agreements with private security firms also raise questions about the government's accountability for potentially controversial human rights practices conducted by its business partners. Okay? Since the introduction of the 1971 Immigration Act, private companies have carried out the administration of many of the UK's detention centres. In an article, Bevan explains that the private security personnel are not members of a police force and are not therefore subject to the normal guidance over detention conditions as the police disciplinary code. The diversification of G4S reliance on Serco into the asylum housing market raises further questions related to this in protecting the lives of asylum seekers housed by these corporations. For instance, while the UK is currently bound to Article 3 and 8 of the European Commission on Human Rights, 3, which prevents it from engaging in inhumane or degrading treatment, the obligations of private sector contractors are more ambiguous. While individual employees of security firms may face legal consequences for questionable actions, though prosecutions are rare and convictions are less frequent, even still, it is difficult to implicate the state in these matters, as it has effectively outsourced its ethical and humanitarian responsibilities. Failed asylum seekers are therefore left exposed not only to the physical and emotional traumas associated with destitution and abandonment, but possible subjection to the excessive use of force without adequate recourse for complaint or justice. I'm going to now move forward, skipping that slide entirely. It's a bit of the theoretical stuff that I think that needs to just kind of go from this paper. Essentially trying to reconceptualize the state. But I'm going to talk about 5 minutes stuff.
You just over 5 minutes?
Right. Okay.
Probably like 6.
Sorry. Okay. Let me end with just summarizing two precautions that we need to take. First of all, is that the government does not act with a singular will. There are very many members in Parliament who are not keen on the developments of immigration legislation. There's a quote there that I will not read out. But the other thing is that we need to think about what the situation was before G4S and Serco and Reliance actually became the providers of this housing, the housing contracts. It wasn't all rosy and peachy when it was provided by local authorities and the state. Angel Group particularly was accused of unsuitable accommodation. Many cases. Here's an example of a mother of 2 being moved 6 times in 12 months to unsuitable accommodation. But let me get to kind of the nuts and bolts of moving forward, and then I'll be done. Basically, we need to think about what's the possibility of resistance to this, if we think that it's necessary, as some do. There is an active community of campaigners currently hard at work in trying to bring an end to the contract between the UK Border Agency and private firms like G4S. Demonstrations have occurred in Glasgow, Sheffield, highlighting the need to drop Serco and G4S from these contracts. There's been a degree of success in defending asylum seekers against the practices of these organizations. In June, Why Refugee Women and the South Yorkshire Migration and Asylum Group, SIMAG for short, applied to the Doncaster Safeguarding Children Board to have the Bradford woman and child that were moved from Bradford to Doncaster into very poor accommodation that wouldn't accommodate a mother and child. About the possibility of improving your conditions. This sparked a response by the local authority, which ultimately resulted in the UK Border Agency finding the property to be unsuitable in its present state for mothers and babies. So UPM, a subcontractor of G4S, was dropped as a result of this action. Okay, and lastly, what I think is kind of the main aim of this whole movement is to collect instances such as these to then bring towards a court case or multiple court cases against the UK Border Agency in these contracts. And so there's been some success already. Just in the last couple of days, we received an email. After collecting examples of asylum seekers who have been placed in substandard housing, public interest lawyers, supported by a team of activists, issued a pre-action letter to G4S and the UKBA, highlighting some of the breaches to many of the legislations that the UK supposedly adheres to. An application was made to the Legal Services Commission, and pressure will be placed on the border agency to conduct an equalities impact assessment on future asylum seekers due to be transitioned from the previous model to this new privatized model. It will prove to be a laborious task, but it is one local authorities have historically been legally expected to conduct. So if G4S is subsequently held to the same expectations as local authorities in this instance, it could prove to help rein in this accountability issue that I've raised that would otherwise leave the private sector untouchable by, say, European human rights commitments. Okay, I'm sorry for going over. Apologize for that.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.